Praising is what matters. He was summoned for that and came to us like the awe from a stone's silence. His mortal heart pressed out a deathless, inexhaustible wine. Whenever he feels the god's paradigm grip his throat, the voice does not die in his mouth. All becomes vineyard, all becomes grape, ripened on the hills of his sensuous south. Neither decay in the sepulchre of kings, nor any shadow that has fallen from the gods can ever detract from his glorious praising. For he is a herald who is with us always, holding far into the doors of the dead a bowl with ripe fruit worthy of praise. So yes, welcome from me. That was a sonnet by Rilke. Some of you will probably recognise that. In a translation by, who is it? Stephen Mitchell. In a translation by Stephen Mitchell. And Rilke is talking about Orpheus. The sonnets to Orpheus were, I think, one of Rilke's sort of finest hours, as it were. He'd already written these immense, long poems called the Do We Know Elegies, all 10 of them, that had taken him, I don't know, years and years and years to write. He'd sort of crafted them. But then the sonnets to Orpheus arrived, and Orpheus, you remember, is in Greek mythology. He's the demigod who plays the lyre. He's learnt music from Apollo, and his singing and his playing, his music is so sublime that all the wild animals of the forest are entranced. They all pause to listen. They fall silent to listen to Orpheus, but not just the animals. It's said that the trees bend towards him and the streams stop flowing in order to listen to Orpheus's song. And of course, Orpheus, his wife Eurydice, died. She died of snake bite. And he went into the underworld to try and save her and bring her back. And how he did that was to sing to Pluto in the underworld, the god of the underworld, the god of death. He sings, and he's so entrances the underworld, Hades, that he's granted Eurydice. She's granted to him to come back to life, to the mortal world, and of course there's one condition that is made, which is that he must step out of the underworld first. She can follow behind him, all the way up to the world of the living. But he must not turn around before they're both out of the underworld. If he turns around, then she's lost. And of course, he resists and resists and resists. He can't hear her behind him, and eventually he just wonders whether she's there, and he can't stop himself, and he turns around, and she's lost. And anyway, there's more that one could say about Orpheus, but I wanted to start by reading Rilke's, one of his sonnets to Orpheus. There's a whole series. They're in two parts. The first sequence is 26 sonnets, and the second is, I think, about 29. And why I wanted to read it was, Rilke is saying praising is what matters. Praising is what we're here for, in a way. Praising is what matters in our life. and I want to come back to that. But also what I wanted to emphasize is how the sonnets to Orpheus appeared. Because, well, I'll just read you what Rilke said in a letter to, I think it to Xaver von Moos in April 1923. He wrote this. Let me just read you a short paragraph. So this is Rilke writing about the sonnets to Orpheus as they appeared to him. And he says, "Even to me, in the way they arose and imposed themselves on me, the sonnets to Orpheus are perhaps the most mysterious, most enigmatic dictation I have ever endured and achieved." He says that they were dictated to him. He just wrote them down. The whole first part was written down in a single breathless obedience between the 2nd and the 5th of April 1922, without one word being in doubt or having to be changed. So that's 26 sonnets written down in 3 days without one word having to be in doubt or be changed. And that at a time when I had braced myself for another great work and was already occupied with it. How can one help growing in reverence and endless gratitude through such experiences in one's own existence? How can one help growing in reverence and endless gratitude through such experiences in one's own existence? It's like they came from beyond him. That's what Rilke experienced, that the sonnets were divine. They were an inspiration from the gods, and all he did was write them down, the first 26, he says, in a single breathless obedience. I love that. Anyway, so tonight I want to talk about surrender and the myth of surrender, the myth of the Dharma life as being a life of opening up to the divine, to the transcendental, to surrendering to a transcendental force, allowing that to come through us, to opening up to not just the muse, as Rilke did, but to the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, to all the enlightened ones, to enlightenment itself, to reality itself. This myth of surrender is, so we've been talking about these myths as myth not in the sense of something false, but myth as in the sense of a great story of our lives, a great guiding narrative of our life, and particularly of our spiritual life, of our Dharma lives. And last week, Satyadasa, and the week before Dharmavati, were talking about the myth of development, the myth of treading a path from where we are now all the way to Buddhahood, all the way to enlightenment. It's the sort of classic myth in Buddhism, that there's a path from unenlightenment to enlightenment. We're all on that path, somewhere on that path, and we can always take another step. We can always take a step towards enlightenment. And growth is something that Bante has particularly emphasized. So the path isn't external to us. It's not a literal external path that's mapped out somewhere and that we can tread. It's an internal path that we have to find within ourselves, but we can be guided, and that's what a teacher is about. A teacher, the Buddha in the end, is a guide to help us on the path, which is an internal path. It's a path of growth of consciousness, growth and refinement of our consciousness, until there's a transcendence, until, as it were, we step beyond and outside of ourselves into a new dimension. That's the path of development, and it's classic. It's the classic path. And last week and the week before, Dharmavati and Sakyadasa, 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 Well, like all of these myths, there's a front and a back, and the front is the positive of this myth, and the back is what can happen if we take the myth wrongly or literally, or we fall prey to the negatives that are inherent in that myth. And I'm not going to repeat everything that Gayavati and Satidasa talked about, but one of the things that is a negative at the back of this myth of development of transcendence is that we can make an effort in the wrong way. We can strive and push and somehow dry up in the process. When Bante was in Kalimpong as a young monk, as a young Buddhist monk, actually, I don't even know if he was, he would have been ordained then as a monk. He was preoccupied with how does the ego, the egoistic self, overcome the self? How do you use yourself to overcome the self? How is that possible that the unenlightened mind can overcome the unenlightened mind? How does that work? Is that even possible? Because on this path of development, so I'm not enlightened, and yet I'm using my own unenlightened will to move me in the direction of selflessness, and there's a contradiction in there somewhere. Doesn't have to be a contradiction, but it is there somewhere. And what Bante came across was, he came across a book by Thomas Merton, who's a Jesuit mystic, and Thomas Merton addresses this sort of paradox about how does the ego overcome the ego. And what Thomas Merton says is that one way out of this paradox is to surrender your will to the will of a teacher. So you, as it were, you give up your own will. And Bante so this would have been the 1940s, decides to do that. And his teacher at the time was Jagdish Kashyapji, who had taught him Pali, who had taught him Sanskrit, and who was a monk himself, a Buddhist monk himself, an Indian Buddhist monk. And so Bante decides to just do what Jagdish Kashyap asked him to do and surrender his own will. And he says that it wasn't that easy because Jagdish Kashyap was very modest and would always ask Bante what they should do, because they went on a sort of pilgrimage together, on a tour together, and Jagdish Kashyap would just defer to the much younger Bante and say what should we do. So Bante had to sort of try to not take the lead, but defer to Jagdish Kashyap's will, and this had very, very important consequences, because when they got to Kalimpong, they weren't in Kalimpong then, when they got to Kalimpong, they stayed there a while, and then Jagdish Kashyap said to Bante that he was going to go off living a wandering life, and he said to Bante, stay here, that is in Kalimpong, stay here and work for the good of Buddhism. So Bante had taken this precept, maybe it was a vow, he'd taken this decision to follow whatever Jagdish Kashyap said. I'm not saying you should do this, by the way, that you should just follow me or anybody else. But anyway, I want to illustrate a traditional way of practicing this myth of surrender, which is a contrast to the myth of development. Bante decided to follow what Jagdish Kashyap said, and he stayed in Kalimpong, and he worked for the good of Buddhism. And it was through staying in Kalimpong that he met his other subsequent Buddhist teachers, many of them Tibetan masters, who came from Tibet, passed through Kalimpong, and settled in Kalimpong when the Chinese invaded Tibet. And it was out of that, of course, that Triratna, the seeds of Triratna were planted then. So very, very significant that Bante took that step. And I just want to use that as the starting point, that and Rilke as a starting point to explore this myth of surrender, where we open up to, rather than treading a path with our own will, we try and, as it were, surrender our will to something or someone higher. And in Bante's case, that was very literal. In Rilke's case, he surrendered to the muse. It's interesting with Rilke, because although I said that development and surrender are myths that can appear in contradistinction to each other, I don't think they are. I think that they can go together. What Rilke did was he was tremendously dedicated to work. He was an admirer of Rodin, and one of the qualities that he really admired in Rodin was his huge capacity to work. The artist as a creator who just has given his life to creating. And Rilke was inspired by Rodin. And he just worked very, very hard on his own poems. And I imagine that the Duino elegies had really stretched Rilke. I mean, they're masterpieces, each one of them, and there's 10 of them. Particularly number 9, I think it's just, I haven't got time to read you the Duino elegies or even one of them, but they really are glorious masterpieces. He'd really pushed himself as an artist, Rilke. And then the sonnets to Orpheus descend. So it's not an accident. It's not an accident. Rilke had pushed and pushed and pushed. But at some point, striving isn't enough. You then have to have something else, another faculty. And it's a faculty of receptivity. It's a faculty of, Keats called it negative capability, of waiting. It's a faculty of serving, of being open to something higher, descending through us. And that's the myth of surrender. So in a way, there you have it illustrated in Rilke as a creative artist. It's not limited to religion. It's certainly not limited to Buddhism. It's not limited to religion at all. I think artists of all sorts have probably experienced, and even if you're not an artist, you've probably experienced inspiration coming at times and drawing more out of you than you knew you were capable. I mean, Maitreya Bandhu talks about this when he says when a poem sort of is written, it's not, you don't feel as a poet that you've written it. You feel like you've been a channel. You've mediated. You've sort of allowed something to come through you. So in the Dharma life, this myth is a myth that says the Buddha, enlightenment, reality itself, can come through us if we get out of the way, if we get out of our own willful, willful sort of egoistic, self-oriented perspective. If we're prepared to serve and if we're prepared to praise, then sometimes something else comes through. And at our own level, I think we can experience that. For me, like, and I'm sure I'm not unusual in this, I was really hesitant about serving, giving up my own will, devotion, ritual. All of those things were scary and even sort of unattractive to me. When I came across Triratna, I was interested, but I was also wary that it was some sort of cult, and anybody that tells me to serve them, you know, I mean, it was just a bit sort of, it would have been very off-putting. That's why I'm not telling you to do that, as it were. It would have been very off-putting. But even pujas, I come from a Hindu background, and you know, I was familiar with the word puja and with the Hindu equivalent of puja, and you know, I thought I'd left all that behind, as it were. But I can remember being on my first retreat, and it was a 10-day retreat in Oxfordshire over Christmas and New Year, and in 1990, Christmas of 94, I think. And I was just overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with the power of the retreat. I mean, meditation opened me up in a way that I'd never experienced. I met people who were like-minded in a way that I never thought I'd meet. I mean, more than just, you know, there were 120 of us on the retreat. I met my teachers. I met some order members, Maitreya Bandhu amongst them, who I was astounded by his creativity, his eloquence, his capacity to articulate the Dharma, and his evident sort of practice. It was there in his being, and he wasn't the only order member there that I was impressed with. But more than that, I don't know, my perception opened up in a way that when you start to meditate it can. Actually, you don't have to be a beginner, but you know how meditation can somehow open you up to different ways of experiencing. I remember going out on a starlit night, you know, one of those clear winter starlit nights, and in London, of course, you don't see the stars, but in Oxfordshire, it was just extraordinarily beautiful, as if I'd never seen them before. I remember looking at a winter tree, a bare tree, just in the school grounds that we were in. And again, it was like I'd never seen a tree before. I couldn't stop gazing at it. I couldn't stop looking at the pattern that the twigs and the branches made against the sky. It was as if it was the most beautiful thing that I'd ever seen. And how could I have not seen it before? Consciousness opened up. And I just felt immensely grateful. I felt that I had found, after many years of searching, I mean, I was only, now it feels I was ridiculously sort of young. I was about 27 or something, I don't know. But at that time, no, I was a bit older, maybe 29. It felt that after all that time, I'd finally found the meaning of my life. And what I wanted to do was, well, in a way, I was overflowing with gratitude. But I didn't know how to express that gratitude. I mean, I could say thank you, but thank you wasn't enough. Not when somebody had just shown me the deepest aspects of my life and given me a way to live, shown me, in a way, who I was for the first time. And I remember just bowing in a puja, making an offering in a puja. And it was the first time that I'd really made an offering. And I lit this incense. I mean, I probably had made an offering, but I'd probably just been going through the motions. But I lit a stick of incense and I bowed to the Buddha. And I didn't know who I was bowing to, what I was bowing to. But it was I bowed with all my heart, all my body, in gratitude at what I'd been given. And it was the only adequate expression of what I was feeling. And it felt, until I did that, as if I was carrying some sort of burden. I needed to do it. I needed to express myself. I needed to bow. So for me, this myth opened up from that bow. And my ordination was, it felt like it felt like that myth was sealed for me at my ordination. This case was put around my neck. I was given my name. I was given a meditation practice of a Buddha, Buddha Vajrasattva, to meditate upon. When you meditate on Vajrasattva, you visualize him above your head. He's sitting on a pure white lotus. He's the color of he's dazzling white, like he's made of light, but the light is the color of sunlight on snow. It's said he's above your head, and his nectar pours down into your body from the crown of your head and fills you with his wisdom and his love. And the night of my ordination, when I did that sadhana, I'd received my name. In a way, this myth was sealed for me. It was like there was no going back from that. I knew that this was the most important thing. No, even that feels like it's too weak. It was what I was born for. This was what it felt like. This was the meaning of my life. And the myth was encapsulated in this figure of Vajrasattva above my head. He was the meaning of my life. He was everything that my life at its best was trying to realize. And Bante, for me, has been a figure of this myth. Now, Bante, of course, he wasn't a Buddha. He wasn't this glowing being made of light. He was flesh and blood and human with his own idiosyncrasies and personality and flaws and particularities. But for me, as well as the human figure, Bante was an archetype. He was my teacher with a capital T, and when I used to go and see him, not always, but often, I would bow. I would sort of prostrate and touch his feet, something that we don't do in England. It's very un-English. And he was in a way very English, and he'd just be sitting in his armchair in his slippers, and he wouldn't stop me from doing it. He was probably used to people doing it. It's not what he probably wanted, but for me it was an expression of my gratitude, which was I needed to do. I'm not saying that everybody is like me, and you don't need to be like me, and you certainly don't need to feel like that about Bante in order to practice. I'm trying to illustrate that for me this myth of surrender is a very deep personal inspiration in my life. I've never been that good at striving. I don't seem to be able to strive. Matt is sitting here, who lives with me in my community, and he's grinning. I don't know. I'm undisciplined. I can't get out of bed in the morning. I enjoy cake and pleasure, and I've just had sort of steamed golden syrup pudding upstairs, and that for me is what I want to do with my life. I want to live with friends and have golden syrup steamed pudding. So striving feels a bit sort of anathema to me, and it's not that I don't make an effort. I'm trying to think how. That's what everybody's suddenly wondering. How does he make an effort? I don't know, Matt. But for me, it's more that I want to serve the Dharma. I'm less bothered about am I less bothered about reaching enlightenment? In a way, that's not true either. I do want to realize the nature of reality. But for me, that is about opening up. It's about receptivity, getting out of the way. And I want to serve the Buddhas. I want to serve the Dharma. That feels very inspiring to me. Vasantra once said to me, he said, make of your life an offering, Jnanavaca, make of your life an offering. And when he said it to me, I was both inspired and horrified. It's like, please don't say that. Please, please, please don't say that to me. Because if I really took that seriously, it would mean being prepared to, in a way, give up on my will, my wants, my everything, if you see what I mean. It would be, I don't know what the consequences would be. I don't know if I'd give up pudding, but it's more that at a deeper level, I'd have to somehow give up on my life for me. And I'm very inspired to make of my life an offering. I've got a long way to go before I can say that that's what I'm actually doing. So this myth of service, of surrender, is very important to me. But it does have its dangers. It does have its dangers, and maybe I want to touch on a couple of dangers before trying to wrap up. So, well, one danger, it's obvious in a way. It can lead to a certain sort of passivity. Surrender can be a sort of, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to wait till the muses or the gods or the divine or the Buddhas inspire me to do anything. Yeah. And if Rilke had just gone passive, the sonnets to Orpheus wouldn't have emerged. I'm sure they wouldn't have emerged. So there is a danger of passivity. In Hinduism, you see this as fatalism. I mean, maybe we're not so subject to that in the West, but in Hinduism, there's a real sort of sense of, oh well, it's the God's will, and I can't do anything about it. So if I drive on the wrong side of the road or go racing around hairpin bends and we're all going to die in a coach or something, that'll be God's will, nothing to do with the driver or how I'm driving. So that's a sort of back end of this myth. It's also possible to sort of start worshipping the Buddha or the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas without any real reflection on what they are, who they are. The Buddha is not a creator God. He's not a God in the sense of a theistic God. He's not a God at all. He was a human being who, by his own efforts, and that's interesting, by his own efforts, achieved a transcendental consciousness that's beyond ordinary human consciousness. And, I have a sense of what that might mean. I don't know completely what that might mean. But it is different to just worshipping a god. And what the Buddha said was that he could only show the way. He gave these teachings, but we had to make the effort. So there's a danger that we could worship without somehow working on our minds, somehow, differentiating between skillful and unskillful, and encouraging the skillful and discouraging the unskillful, and getting up every day and meditating and working on our minds, working on metta, trying to be generous when we don't feel like being generous, all of those things. Worship's not going to do all of that. It won't transform us on its own. So there's a danger there. But I think there's strengths. The strengths, the front end that I particularly want to emphasize is that this myth is a heart myth. You You can't do this myth without the heart, without love, without gratitude, without reverence. And without those heart qualities, I don't think Buddhism works. It doesn't get you very far. You can, do the mindfulness of breathing sort of assiduously, but without the imagination and the heart being involved at some stage, it doesn't get you very far. It certainly won't get us to enlightenment. And I think without the heart and without the imagination, and by imagination I mean something not like fantasy, I mean something that is an intuitive response to reality. Reality as it appears in images. It's a response of our total being, of our head, our heart, our will. Imagination, without that, all we're left with is Buddhism as a reasonable sort of therapeutic system, which might make you or me more happy, perhaps, less stressed. What Buddhism easily becomes is a sort of benign humanism. Even, you can incorporate Buddhist ethics, you can work on your mind, but it still can be like a benign humanism without this imaginative response to something beyond the human, the transcendental. And that's going to be a heart response. Well, it's going to be an imaginative response, which does involve more than the heart. It involves the head as well. I was reading in Ratnaduna's written this wonderful book called Great Faith, Great Wisdom. And in that, he talks about, says normally faith, well, sometimes, at least in that developmental model of the path, faith can be seen as a starting point, and then the path culminates in wisdom. Ratnaduna in his book reverses that and talks about the wisdom that has faith as its goal. The wisdom that has faith as its goal. As if faith, Shraddha, is in a way the pinnacle of the Dharma life, a complete opening up to the beyond. When the Buddha was, when the Buddha was newly enlightened, there's a sutta called the Garva Sutta in which he says that he was newly enlightened and he starts to wonder who he can look up to, who he can revere. So he's discovered this new consciousness that is more than human consciousness, that's beyond the dualism of subject and object, beyond the consciousness is beyond even time and space. It's beyond any category that human beings can conceive. He's discovered this. He's abiding in the bliss and the freedom of this new consciousness. And as far as he knows, he's the first one to have discovered this consciousness. And in the Garva Sutta, what he says is that his instinct is to say, who can I look up to? That I need, if you can say that the Buddha needed, I don't know if you can say that he needed anything, but it's almost as if he needed to revere this quality of reverence. He says that without reverence, to live without reverence is to live an unsatisfactory life, is dukkha, to live without reverence. Even for a Buddha, to live without reverence is dukkha. And so the Buddha looked around, as it were, with his new consciousness, his transcendental consciousness, to see who he could revere. And there was nobody that was enlightened like he was, or more enlightened than he was. And so there was no human being or divine being that he could revere. So he decides to revere the Dharma, the Dharma as reality itself. He decides to revere the Dharma and live revering the Dharma. So I find that very interesting, that the Buddha himself felt that reverence was an innate need in human consciousness, even in enlightened consciousness. And I think if we don't revere, if we don't give expression to our reverence in the right way, and what I mean by the right way is if we don't revere an object that is worthy of reverence, like a Buddha, if we don't revere the highest at the highest level, then probably we'll revere at lower levels. And what happens is if you revere naively at the lower level, then you get let down. In our culture, it's fashionable not to revere anybody. You know, I'm not going to look up to anybody. But then you look at how footballers are treated, or pop stars are treated, or actors and actresses are treated, or royalty is treated. And, well, maybe not royalty, because they're not treated so well, are they, anymore. But they're treated as if they're superstars. Yeah, superheroes, superstars. So the reverence is still there in our culture, but it's not directed to people that aren't able to carry that reverence. And then we get disappointed, yeah, when I don't know, when they do something silly or whatever. A lot of people revered Bante and got disappointed when they realised that he wasn't perfect. And I think the answer to that is to not revere a human being for being perfect. Don't revere any human being expecting them to be perfect. If you revere the Buddha as the perfect embodiment of consciousness, then in a way the Buddha won't let you down. And then you can also respect and maybe even revere human beings, but at a lower level, knowing that they might let you down, they're not going to be perfect. So I could revere Bante as my teacher who had shown me the way to the Buddha. But it was the Buddha that I was directing my my spiritual life to, not to Bante. I wasn't going for refuge to Bante, but I felt an enormous, and still do, sense of gratitude and reverence to him for opening up my life to the Buddha. So yes, although there are dangers with this myth, and disappointments perhaps, and there can be crises, and maybe next week we'll hear more about the possibility of those, I think that without some degree of reverence, of faith, of shraddha, of the heart opening to something more, of an ability to bow to mysteries that are beyond us, an ability to imagine consciousness beyond the human, beyond the dualistic world that we're in. Without all of that, Buddhism isn't really Buddhism, I think. It just becomes a therapeutic, benign humanism. And if that was what it was, I wouldn't be interested. That's not what I want to serve. That's not what I want to do with my life. So I want to sort of start wrapping up. One more thing I'll say, that if you do learn to the extent, I think, that we start to use our capacity to imagine, to revere, to open up to life, without dismissing our reason. I'm not saying we should dismiss our reason at all, but if we can start to do that, the world appears more magical to us. It starts to be more magical. It's a bit like the world will look back at us with the eyes with which we look at it with. And if we look at the world as if it were an inert machine, meaningless, then that's how the world will appear to us. If you look at the world as if it was a magical apparition of wonder, everything is a wondrous thing, then that's how it will appear. I don't always manage to look at the world like that, but that's what my Dharma life is teaching me to do more and more. Einstein said there are two ways to look at the world. One is as if nothing is a miracle, and the other is as if everything is a miracle. I prefer the latter as an aspiration, at least, and the world will look back at us in the same way. So a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, I did this long solitary retreat. I was on solitary for 6 months, and the world became magical, as it can do on retreat. And when you're being on your own for 6 months, meditating a lot, doing pujas a lot. I was doing pujas every day, sometimes more than once a day, reflecting, reading Dharma, reading poetry. The world, everything starts to be magical. So when I saw a snake, it wasn't just a reptile. It was like I'd been visited by a snake with a capital S. And that's how it is. That's how it feels. A naga serpent. A naga is the protector of wisdom. The world is alive with myth. On the 28th of August, it was 26th of August, it was Bante's birthday, and I was on retreat. It was his 93rd birthday, and I can remember, in my morning meditation, wishing him well. He was still alive then, and I had a photograph of him on my shrine and bowing to him and just bearing him in mind and feeling enormous gratitude to him. And then I walked out to the sort of grove in front of my house, and there was an almond grove, and I started picking some almonds for my, to put on my porridge. I mean, they're beautiful almond trees, and you could just pick some almonds, and there were also blackberries and figs. I had a fig tree just opposite my house, and, although they may not have been ripe yet. Anyway, I picked some almonds, and then I thought, oh no, I need to offer something to Bante, and I didn't have anything to offer. So I had these 3 almonds, and I offered them to the shrine to Bante. And then, in my own, I'm not a poet and never will be, but these lines descended. I know what it's like to have something descend on me. Normally it happens in meditation. But this time it was just some lines really, not even a poem. And I wrote them down. They're lines dedicated to Bante, and I'm going to finish with them. And I wanted to, I thought, when I come back from this 6 months, I'll go and see Bante. I knew I would see him because I'd seen him before I went on this solitary. I'd asked for his blessings, and he'd given me his blessings. And he had been very present in my mind on this solitary retreat. And what I thought I'd do is go and see him and offer him those almonds and read him this poem. And at the end of my retreat, I was clearing up my shrine. On the last day of my retreat, I was clearing up my shrine, and there were these 3 almonds, in their shells on my shrine. And I thought, shall I take them with me? I was in southern Spain. And I thought, oh, don't be so silly, sentimental, Jnanavaca. He doesn't want your almonds, does he? and I was suddenly trying to get back into, normal mode. Anyway, I took them with me. I brought them with me, thinking just in case. And he died. He died the day after I got back. So I didn't get a chance to see him. I was very moved that it was the day after I got back, in that I could be with the Sangha, I could see his body, go and see his body, and I could go and go to his funeral. And to the grave, I offered these 3 almonds, so they're buried with him somewhere. So they're there, and so I'll just see if I can remember the few lines, and then finish with that. Then we'll have a cup of tea. Well, I'll hand back to Jnanavaca, and she'll say what we're doing next. So, to Bante on his birthday. From my remote retreat, I can send no word on your birthday, Bante, this your 93rd. And all I have to offer, just picked from a tree, 3 fresh almonds for the jewels you've given me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jnanavaca. Very, very moving to hear about your relationship with Bante, and actually how you've practiced surrender in your life, and to frame that with the poems first by Rilke and then your poems, and they're very, very moving. And and lovely to hear about Bante's relationship as well with his teacher. So feeling very you talked about how this myth is really a myth deeply connected to the heart, and I can really feel my heart open. We'll have a cup of tea in a few moments, but I just wanted to invite you actually to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to share this talk. We're trying to reach more people with the Dharma, as many people as we can, and we really think we could have more subscribers to our channel. So do subscribe to our channel, help us to spread these teachings, to spread the 3 jewels to more and more people. And another way that you can do that to help us is to give to the Buddhist Centre. So it's been nearly a year now that we had to close our doors, and that has a very, very big impact on us financially. And we offer so many of our teachings freely, and we really, really want to continue to do that, to give the Dharma freely. And in order to do that and to reach as many people as possible, we do need financial stability. So if you've got the means, do invest in the Dharma, invest in the Buddhist Centre. It's such a good thing to do with your money, and we'll use your money really, really wisely and really, really appropriately. We're not going to give it all to Jnanavaca, unfortunately, to make more steamed pudding. We put it back into the Buddhist Centre to keep doing this, actually. So if you can give, do give. It'll be very, very greatly received.